Welcome to Let's Be Frank, the men's mental health podcast. Join us as we break the stigma, embrace vulnerability, and prioritise mental health in men. Together, let's use your voice. Guys, welcome back to another episode of Let's Be Frank, the men's mental health podcast, the home of men's mental health, with myself, Jack Coward, and Mr. Ryan Smith. Today, again, we are joined by a very special guest, Dr. Alex Curmi, a NHS psychiatrist and psychotherapist. He is the host of the Thinking Mind podcast, and also he is here to discuss mental health challenges faced by men and using practical steps to improve mental well-being. So, without further ado, let's dive in. First of all, Mr. Ryan Smith, how are you, mate?
I'm excited about this one. This is
gonna be a good one,
this
isn't
is
it?
the first. It's just bringing a doctor into things now. It's exciting. It's just how have we gone from that first episode, just us two waffling, to actually getting people reaching out to us, like we at this sort of level. It's just amazing, and I'm just looking forward to the future. So
It is going to be a very exciting episode. We've just been speaking off air, and already the conversation has been flowing very open and frankly, which we love. And it's going to bring a complete different perspective to the podcast. So I know, again, we're going to go into the Thinking Mind podcast and talk about that as well. Obviously, they're coming at it from this professional point of view and then bringing the lived experience in. We're opposite. We're lived experience, bringing the professionals in, but we both love to do the lived experience stories and allow people to have a safe place to kind of communicate, open up, and with the help of that, allows the listeners to really feel at home with the hosts and also the guests that come in. So yeah, I'm very excited, and I want to bring in the special guest, Dr. Alex. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you
do I
so
have to
much for
do I
having
have
me
to
on.
do the whole doctor before everything now, or is it?
Alex is
Hey,
fine.
we've done
Alex is all good.
we've done the basics out of the way. But hey, listen, you've gone out there, you've done it, you've earned it, mate. And huge, respect to you for that. So, gonna jump straight in, and I want you, if you don't mind, just to give us a bit of a background about yourself, what it is you do, what you're qualified as, and just your experience overall.
Yeah, so I've got 3 jobs technically at the moment. I'm a psychiatrist, a consultant psychiatrist in the NHS, and I'm also training as a psychotherapist. And a lot of people aren't necessarily sure of the differences between psychiatry and psychotherapy, and I can get into that obviously if you guys want me to. And then I also make podcasts. As you said, it's the Thinking Mind podcast, and it covers all of these different areas: mental health, psychology, psychiatry, self development, some of the philosophical underpinnings of mental health. And we talk to experts, but we talk to everyday people who have also had their own experiences of mental health difficulties. And really, the way I got to this place, because it's kind of weird to have 3 jobs, although I love it. And I feel very grateful to be in a position to have to be able to make a living doing something that I feel very interested in, very fulfilled by, something I'm happy to spend time on the weekends doing. And really, the way I got to this point is through a series of experiments. And when I talk to people about career planning and how to forge a career, I encourage experimentation, because I think a lot of people want to jump straight into the perfect job. They're like, I don't have a job now. I want to have a job that fulfills me, pays the bills, where I feel socially connected, where all my dreams come true. And obviously, as I'm sure you guys know, reality doesn't really work like that. And I think, especially to young people, to young men, who I'm sure a lot of whom listen to this podcast, you really want to experiment, because you don't even necessarily, when you're in your early 20s, say, you don't even necessarily know what kind of job you'd be good at or appropriate for. You don't even know necessarily what your values are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. And the only way you're going to figure that out is through action. People really underestimate the importance of trying out new behaviors in the outside world, in the external world, to figure out what's going on internally. And so that's what I did. I did a series of experiments. I grew up in a small island called Malta.
Ah, so it's one of my. Do you know, as silly as you say that, but we've I think we're about 3,500 downloads now from Malta.
Really?
Um, yeah,
Yeah,
so
and we still need to go on
we've
holiday
got
there, don't we? We did
yeah,
plan a holiday a
we were
while ago
looking at
for
that
that.
last year, but it's one of my favourite places to visit. It's a absolutely beautiful little country. Um, it's
Yeah.
quite surprising how you can go from one end of the country to the other, going through all the little villages and things like that, and it's so diverse. And yeah, I just think it's a magical little country, and the history there. Anyway, I get excited about it.
No, it really is. It really is. And I appreciate more how interesting and in some senses bizarre it is. The longer I've been out of the country for 10 years now. And I love going back. And I love spending time with my family when I'm back there. And it's an amazing mixture of different cultural influences. So growing up there, I had a very, I think, it's if you grow up on a small island, you have a bit of a small view on the world. And I always felt I wanted to see, what the wider world is like. So I did my medical school in Malta because if you're good at biology and chemistry, they're like, right, medical school is for you. There aren't like a lot of options. Psychology was never on the table, which is a shame because I love psychology. So I did medical school, and kind of in medical school, even though I really liked certain aspects of it, I felt a certain sense of disillusionment in that I knew something about being a doctor, like being a GP, say, or being a surgeon, or being a hospital doctor wasn't really for me. But I knew I should at least, do my foundation years after medical school and get like fully qualified. So I did that in Scotland. And going from a sunny Mediterranean island to Scotland was a quite a transition, It was such a hard, so my first 2 years of medical work were in Scotland, and it was such a hard experience going from a relatively relaxed life to very, very hard work. But it was so important. It was such a driver of my maturity. And I think throwing yourself into something difficult again for men is so important to test yourself, to force yourself to grow, to see exactly, where are your strengths and weaknesses. So I spent 2 years doing that. And then I did a year of freelance work, and I was like, I knew being a doctor in the conventional sense wasn't going to be for me, but I loved psychology. And I when I did psychiatry rotations, there's something about why people are the way they are, why they behave the way they behave, and what can go wrong in the mind. Really fascinated me, and I guess didn't scare me the way it can be quite scary for a lot of people. So a friend of mine said, I'm gonna do a training in London at this hospital called the Maudsley, and they said you should consider it, and I had never heard of it. And so I sort of took a year out, beefed up my CV, and applied, got waitlisted, and then got in from the waitlist. And that was like 7 years ago, and I've been doing psychiatry ever since. And then halfway through that 7 years, I started doing psychotherapy training. So from medicine, I made a sort of tangential move to psychiatry, and then even though I like a lot of aspects of psychiatry, I really love psychotherapy. So then I made another tangential move, and then another one to podcasting. And that's what I encourage people to do, is to make these moves. Like, don't figure out everything from the beginning, because you don't know the high resolution picture straight away. Just figure out what, like, from your experience, accrue new experiences, and then think, what's the right overall direction? Maybe it's not exactly right, but this is the overall direction. And then keep making tangential moves until you find yourself in a place where, actually, wow, I really enjoy my work. But it's not an overnight process. It took me 15
I
years
think that's
to
really
get to this point.
valuable though for a lot of listeners. That is very valuable. Like for myself, I left school and joined the army straight away, and then spent 9 years in the army. And since coming out in 2018, like,
Mm,
I speak to obviously Ryan a lot, and he knows I'm still finding my way since coming out. I've not found
mm-hmm.
something that I really kind of can get a hold of and stick with. That literally, I'll go into a job 6 months later, I'm like, no, I'm bored, I need to get out. But since starting for me, since starting this podcast, talking more about men's mental health, talking more about my own story and journey, talking more to the guests that come on, talking to people that work outside of work about their own mental health, it's more and more the whole kind of canceling aspect for myself is coming up. So for me now, it's like, right, let's do a simple, well, I say simple, but let's do a level two. Let's see how I feel about that, and then let's maybe go into a level. And
Mm.
as you say, just take these little steps, try out different things, and kind of learn what direction is right for you. But a quick question I want to ask is, since obviously being born and raised in Malta, that doing all of your training over in the UK and that, what are some of the differences with regards to mental health that you see in Malta to the mental health you see over here, both with the stuff that's available for people to better themselves, but also, is it a higher rate of mental health in the UK? Is it worse in Malta? Is it better? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I don't have a huge amount of experience working in the mental health system in Malta, but in terms of cultural attitudes, I would say mental health is still very much stigmatized in Malta and still very much a taboo subject. I think less so here. I think a lot has happened in the UK to decrease the stigma around particularly common mental health conditions like anxiety, depression, more common psychological problems, maybe PTSD. Although I still think there's a lot of stigma around some more severe mental illnesses like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, things like that. But in Malta, I think there's still a more global taboo. And Malta is a very Catholic country, and you can really feel that influence everywhere. On the positive side, Malta is very community oriented, and I think one of the most important things that a person can do to protect their own mental health is to be part of a tight community. Although it can have its downsides, because it can feel a bit claustrophobic and it can feel very reputational and it can feel like all eyes are on you all the time. Close social bonds, we know, is definitely a huge protective factor for one's mental health. And one problem I see in the UK and other big Western countries like the United States is that we're very atomized and we seem to have this belief that we can exist on our own. And unfortunately, we have the infrastructure and the technology that makes that possible. You can rent an apartment by yourself, you can get food delivered to your house. If you have, like, you see it a lot in London, you see it a lot in professionals in their late 20s, early 30s. They sort of rent a room by themselves in a house. Maybe they work from work remotely, so they spend all their time in one room. All of their needs can be catered for by financially getting stuff delivered to their house, essentially, and you never need to have contact with the outside world. And it happens insidiously, but it has a huge effect on one's mental health. And we all know this, of course, because of COVID, where we all went a little bit crazy for a year and a half because we were under a very strict lockdown. And it's amazing what a profound effect it has. So we a little bit, we have in the UK, I think, a bit of hubris that we can be very individualistic. And I think that will get us into trouble. So that's definitely one thing Malta has going for it. But on the other hand, I think things are a bit less stigmatized in the UK. And I think we have a bit more expertise in very specific kinds of mental health conditions because you see more cases. In Malta, you don't necessarily see a lot of cases. So those are the main
Yeah, I
differences, I
mean,
think.
every time I've been to like Malta, I do make a point of going to the smaller villages and things like that, just to try and soak up the atmosphere and that sort of sense of culture that community that you see. You can sit on a corner drinking a coffee, just watching the world go by, and everybody's saying hello to each other. They're stopping in the road, in the middle of the street to talk to each other. People are papping the horns, not to like get out of the way, but to like wave hi and all that sort of stuff. And then,
Yeah.
like you say, in the sort of even in the smaller towns around, in the UK, it is that sort of leave me alone. I've got, and it's go go go, and it is how do we take the best of both worlds and roll it out everywhere, right? And I think if we can look at that, but again, with like you say, with that sort of experience and stuff, and absorbing as much as you can, I think is really sort of relevant to the way men need to be, and I think we have lost a little bit of resilience. I'm guilty of that, and that sort of mental resilience I think will go a long way. I mean, it's been quite testing for me, sort of the last 3-4 months, because we've had a newborn come in. We didn't plan for it, and that's kind of dropped that sort of new life experience for me. And with the podcast, the way the podcast is going, um you, it's about all these experiences, like you say, and I feel better for it, but it does scare me a little bit. So um yeah, so it's not really a question, but it's just my sort of experiences of the things that you've said. So if we kind of go on now then, and let's think about your sort of position with the NHS, your psychiatrist, your psychotherapist. You've kind of witnessed um, the power of the ideas of conversation and things um, in improving people's lives. How do you believe open dialogue can sort of positively impact sort of men's mental health in particular?
Yeah, so conversation is something we take for granted. We talk to each other every day. We feel like we're having conversations a lot. We listen to conversations a lot, but we don't necessarily have high quality conversations. And in mental health in general, hopefully, but particularly in psychotherapy, you have the opportunity to have really high quality conversations. And what that requires as the psychotherapist, first and foremost, is listening. Most people have no idea how to listen. Most people think listening is not speaking while the other person is speaking, and you kind of have to remember, okay, I'm going to say this. This is the point I'm going to say, and then you wait for them to stop speaking, and then you say what your point is. Listening is the willingness to drop all of your self-consciousness and to stop caring about what you're thinking, how you're coming across now, how you're going to come across later in the conversation, what you're going to say, whether you're going to sound clever or not, whether you look cool or not. Or you have to drop all of that stuff and focus all of your attention on the other person, because we have a very narrow bandwidth of attention and we can only really focus meaningfully on one thing at a time. So listening is focusing all of your bandwidth on another person, and that includes sort of the verbal, the non-verbal, body language, facial expressions, the tone of voice, all of that, in such a way that really the power of listening is not necessarily, not so much you getting all the stuff from them, but creating a space where they say stuff that is new to them. So probably you guys have great conversations on your podcast all the time. So a great conversation is a conversation where you don't know what's going to come out of your mouth next. I didn't know I was going to speak about this before this interview started, but you guys set up good questions. So now I don't necessarily know what I'm going to say next. I don't know what I'm going to say 10 minutes from now. And your job as a psychotherapist is to create that environment where your client is discovering themselves, because a lot of people have a very, very low self-awareness. They don't know themselves well. This is like, so if you go back to sort of the beginnings of psychotherapy with someone like Freud, this was one of his major insights, is that most of what's going on in our minds we're not conscious of. And we take this for granted now. We say, oh, unconsciously, this is probably what I meant. We throw these words in. But when Freud introduced them, this was very radical, and people were very reluctant to accept that we had an unconscious mind. People were very reluctant to accept that what happens in your early life could affect your adulthood. These were almost considered dangerous, if not radical ideas. In any case, people don't know themselves often. They don't know what they care about. Again, they don't know what their strengths and weaknesses are. They're not, this is important, they're not aware of their inner conflicts. A lot of psychological suffering results from conflicts. I kind of think and believe one thing, but I kind of think and believe the opposite thing as well. I know I need to get in shape and go to the gym, but I kind of want to watch Netflix and eat pizza. It's conflict. We're full of conflicts. And until we can start to become aware of them, we can't iron them out. And so you're like a boat with a lot of rowers who are rowing in different directions. And part of psychological health, to some degree, is to, as much as possible, get all of the different parts of you rowing in the same direction. So self-awareness is a huge part of that. And so self-awareness is a huge part of psychotherapy. And then I think another aspect of it that's really important is the relationship that's formed between the therapist and the client. So you want to form a relationship that is helpful, healing, and uncomplicated, or as uncomplicated as possible, because a lot of our relationships are very complicated because life is really complicated and we're really complicated. In psychotherapy, you want to try and create a bit of a haven away from real life and have a relationship that's as uncomplicated as possible, where your client feels that basically you just, as much as possible, just want what's best for them and not trying to help them in a collaborative way along that. So self-awareness, a helping relationship, and then the third part, which is a part I'm really interested in, is the therapist helping the client with the ideas, giving them the ideas, the frameworks, the mindsets, the techniques, a lot of the nuts and bolts of interesting things they can do outside of therapy, because a lot of the good stuff that comes from therapy actually happens in between sessions. I think you can have great therapy sessions, but if you do nothing to apply what you learn in the outside world, you're not going to get a lot from it. I used to take piano lessons from a Russian teacher, and he used to tell me the same thing. It's like the goal of the lesson is not to improve in piano. You improve in piano in between lessons. The goal of the lesson is to make your practice as useful and efficient as possible. To be like, okay, you're playing the song very badly right now. He was Russian, so he was very blunt. And we're like, you're playing the song very badly. You need to fix A, B, C, and D. And so when I would go and practice, it's like, you have a framework of understanding to push you forward. And that's, I think, one of the really valuable things that psychotherapy can offer you. So I think if I had to summarize it, there's a lot you can go into all three of those in a lot of depth. But I think it's self-awareness, the helping relationship, and then the frameworks, the ideas, the techniques, that kind of thing.
That will bring a lot of light to people and to the listeners and that, and will allow them to kind of almost understand a little bit more before they go into a session. Because I think that's,
So it's got me thinking
yeah,
now.
it is. And I think a lot of people, when they go into a session, can become kind of nervous and scared and a bit, not sure what's going to happen, so a bit fearful. So having even just them three topics will allow them to kind of take, a bit of a sit back. I know we was talking off air briefly, and I wanted to, obviously bring the topic up again and get your opinion on professionals working with or alongside those that are lived experience, having that aspect of both individuals with a potential, either with a client or just having that conversation afterwards. What is your thoughts around them two kind of collaborating together?
So I would say lived experience is key. And when you're working with anyone, whether that's a client in therapy or a patient in your clinic or a patient in hospital, whatever the situation, their experience of their life and their difficulties is the territory which should be your North Star. And that should be the sort of fundamental grounding of what you do. And then on top of that, all the fancy ideas, the theories, what we learn in science, the ideas, the techniques, those are kind of maps and frameworks that help you to understand the, the client's experience, the territory. So I think what any clinician needs to do is to constantly go back and forth between territory, the person's real experience, and the theory. Again, I hate to use another piano analogy, but there's the actual music you play, how it sounds, does it sound good or not? And there's all the theory about what might sound good, about reading music, musical ideas and musical theory. And you want to bounce between the two. And you want to, and I'm fortunate enough that I'm in a psychotherapy training that encourages this. Come up with your own theory, philosophy about what is important in mental health, how you think mental health works, and then continually test that theory against the reality of what your clients are experiencing. One problem that I think is very common in the mental health sector is that, because there's a million different ways to think about someone's mental health. You can think about it from a very medical way, cognitive behavioral way, psychoanalytic, humanistic. There's all these different ways of thinking about it. And one very common problem is that a clinician falls in love with one particular way of seeing things. Let's say they fall in love with psychoanalysis, a very specific theory of how the mind works and how to help people. And then when they find people that don't fit their theory, they say, oh, they're not analyzable, or they don't, I'm going to refer them to someone else, or there's something anomalous, or they're a difficult person to work with. And I object to that quite strongly. I think if the client's experience isn't fitting your theory, then you need to adapt your theory to the client, not the other way around. And that might involve reading different kinds of theory, different schools of thought, and just generally being quite mentally flexible. But ultimately, the client's experience, what helps them, what's caused them difficulty should be your North Star. And then you should have this continual back and forth with the world of ideas, which can then, I think, be a very powerful
It's a bit like
combination.
telling there's an analogy about a goldfish calling it stupid for not being able to climb a tree. And
Yeah.
I just as you said that,
Yeah,
it just
exactly.
popped into my head, that sort of, you can't fit a square peg in a round hole type. It's all these different analogies, and like you say, if you've got that sort of one way of sort of thinking, you're really limiting yourself, I suppose, aren't you? As a working professional, I suppose you kind of channel yourself into kind of a really narrow passage, so to speak. So by taking sort of multiple sort of aspects, I suppose you kind of broaden your horizon, and putting yourself in a better place to help the individual that ultimately you're trying to help.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, that, it's hard to get away from the idea that ultimately a theory is a human constructed notion or set of notions about how to deal with real problems. And that being the case, you can never you should be very fluid with your ideas and your beliefs, I think. Obviously there's a hierarchy. You might hold some beliefs with much more strength than you hold other beliefs. But in general, your beliefs about the world, I believe, should be held very lightly, and you should be feel free to dispose or discard or change or modify beliefs as soon as you start to consistently encounter data, information, experiences that proves them wrong. And that's what makes you a dynamic problem solving person. And I think with the world going in the direction that's it is going at the moment with things like artificial intelligence, you really want to be a dynamic person. And one of the best ways to do that is to acquire experience in different disciplines, because each discipline you can think of, like medicine, say, or surgery or psychotherapy, what have you. Each discipline is not just a series of activities, but it's a whole way of conceptualizing the world. And the more ways you have at your disposal, the more you are able to handle problems which are unpredictable. And if you look at world history, that's the thing about history, is life is continually throwing very different unpredictable problems. The problems that you guys encountered this week, you may have encountered problems that you never in your life would have even predicted that you would encounter problems of that particular nature. I've had experiences in my life where I thought I'd never in a million years dreamt I would encounter this specific problem, but then you have it in front of you. And so it's really helpful not to just fall in love with one particular way of solving problems, but to become a problem solver, to become a dynamic problem solver that can move in between different sets of ideas. So that when life is unpredictable, you can match it with an unpredictable way of solving
When
problems.
we look at on how we improve our mental well-being and our mental health, from your experience, not only as a professional but obviously run the podcast that you do, what would be your kind of, I don't like using the word tips and tricks because I don't believe there's a such thing as a tips and tricks, but let's look at
Yeah.
three practical steps that we could kind of utilize in today's world. What would those three practical steps look like for us to kind of better our mental well-being?
I would say I can narrow it down to three categories. So three like kinds of things to think about. So firstly, think about your hardware, your biology. We're very biological. And then next we can think about our psychology. And then we can think about our social life, our social existence, because we're very, very social animals. So, in terms of our hardware, there are some things you need. You need good sleep. You need to have really good sleep hygiene. You need to have good nutrition. You need to, and this is a huge problem nowadays, exclude bad nutrition, which is often the problem people have, isn't so much that they're not eating good things, but they're also eating a ton of bad things. You need to think about managing drugs and alcohol, and then need to think about any medical problems you might have that might be contributing to a worsening of your mental health. In terms of psychology, what I think is really important, exposing yourself to difficult things regularly in small ways on a voluntary basis. And a good example of this is something like exercise. Obviously, exercise relates to our hardware, right, as well to our biology, but it also relates to our psychology. When people train, they're always getting a little bit better. So they're setting a program where hopefully, like in progressive overload, when you're lifting weights, I love to lift weights. And mainly, I love it because it helps my mind. And when you set a training program, you set it so that you're always slightly, hopefully, out of your comfort zone, enough weight so that it's challenging, but not too much weight that it's overwhelming. And that rule you can apply to almost anything that you want to get better at. In psychology, that's called the zone of proximal development. And it just means that sweet spot, just a little bit harder than I'm used to, not so hard that I'm overwhelmed by it. Take any skill that you want to improve in your life, and you can use that framework of that sweet spot, the Goldilocks zone, if you like. Other things that's important in psychology, I think, as I said before, becoming a little bit more self aware. And you don't need to do that with therapy. You can do the simplest, cheapest way to do it is by writing a journal. And that would be like opening up a book or your computer and not having like a plan for what to write, almost allowing yourself to write, letting your hands do what your hands are going to do. Very, very free, spontaneous expression. That's what you do in therapy as well. That's what I would encourage my clients to do, because if you let yourself go spontaneously, that's where you get into that zone where you start to discover stuff that you didn't already know about yourself. Self awareness, once you become aware of inner conflicts, starting to iron out those inner conflicts, getting things rowing in the same direction. I think that's really important. Probably lots more I could talk about in psychology, but let's talk about social life. It's really important to feel like you're surrounded by people that care about you, that you feel you're useful and helpful in their life, and you feel they can be useful and helpful to you, particularly when you're in a crisis. I think for men, heterosexual men, really important to have a good relationship with an intimate partner. If you don't have that, if you're struggling with dating, a lot of men are struggling with dating at the moment. Learn how to date, learn how to meet women, learn what it means to get romantically involved with a woman, obviously being respectful and safe at all times. But it's, I think, one very important aspect of men's health is to feel that you can connect with the opposite sex. And I feel a lot of men are in trouble right now for different reasons. So that would be kind of my really, as brief as I can make it, overview. But then there's lots of other stuff you could go into.
They are definitely thought provoking, and there's a lot there that I would have brought up or I would have even thought of. To be fair,
No, that's absolutely like my mind's just like Wow.
Ryan's never one that doesn't have something to say.
What was surprising to you guys?
No, it's just I think it's stuff that I've in one way or another that I know, but being two
Mm.
individuals that have worked sort of in the sort of their health and fitness sort of world and things like that, but trying to envelop that into kind of day to day living and things like that, making them sort of making myself feel a little bit uncomfortable to kind of put myself under that strain to make myself a little bit more resilient is massive. And it's like you say, but it's that voluntary sort of process that you do that. I suppose then it will make those things that are involuntary, like you've had that £1,000 bill come through the door, a little bit easier to process. You,
Oh
you
yeah,
know, so
yeah,
it's that sort of training for the moments that you don't expect, I suppose. And I just
I
think that's
love that
really
progressive
powerful.
overload. I love that. That's proper stuck with me. As like an ex-power lifter, that progressive overload, I was like, yeah, I know that one. I know that feeling. But it's so good, and you generally can bring that. And I'm thinking now, like, of so many different situations and scenarios within myself that I can bring that kind of gym aspect back into my life, and
Absolutely.
actually talking to other people. It's strange. I'm sat here also thinking like, oh, if I was a trained counselor and I was talking to someone, this is how I could use that progressive overload to help them. So that's been massively beneficial to me in the way that I'm now thinking for the next 2 3 years down the line. That's kind of, yeah, that's kind of blown my mind, that one little sentence, to be fair. That's, yeah, spot on that.
yeah. I mean, you know why I love lifting weights because, and when I say I love lifting weights, I don't mean I love every moment I spend in the gym or I love every
It's not
workout,
designed
because
to
I
be.
don't. I don't. Sometimes I don't want to go, but I love it as an idea because weights are an interesting metaphor for reality. Like weights weigh as much as they weigh, and you either can move it or you can't move it. There isn't really an in between unless you're moving into terrible technique. But one metaphor I like to use is, again, I think this really applies to men, is an idea of collisions with reality. So there's you and there's what you think about reality, and we have all sorts of ideas about how reality works, and those ideas we use them to try and get what we want. So we think, okay, this is how I think money works, so I'll go in the world and try and get money using my ideas about money. And what you want to do is collide with reality. You want to have these collisions with reality. And every collision, whether it results in success or failure, is an opportunity to learn something really valuable. Particularly the failures, you don't actually learn that much through success. Success just says, whatever you're doing, keep doing that. And it becomes like a positive feedback loop. But failure tells you, if you choose to look, failure can tell you all sorts of different mistakes that you're making. And so I think it's really important to have a healthy relationship with failure, to almost become friends with failure, to seek out failure voluntarily, and then to like have these little collisions. And every time you collide, oh, okay, this is why I'm going wrong. And then you realize that success isn't like having the thing. Like success isn't, I wanted to get a girlfriend and now I have a girlfriend, or I didn't have any money, now I have money. Success is like knowing that if I need to get money, I can get money. I know how. If I need to date, I know how to date. If I need to make friends, I know how to make friends. And that means when something bad happens, like you get your £1,000 bill through the door, you have that core confidence of like, I know this is going to be unpleasant, but I know how to make that back because I've learned these skills. And that is, I guess it's not happiness exactly, but it's more of that sense of calm and stability that you've tested yourself against the world enough that you can respond to these kind of unpredictable situations.
For us on the show, we always talk about the reason. It is mind blowing, and on the show, we always talk about learning the reason why. So, men are not allowed to cry. We are, but understand the reason why we're crying. Learn the emotions and whatnot. But also, you're talking very much there of not also the why, but the how. If we know the how, then that how becomes the success in future. And I think if you kind of put them both together with, the how and the why, that's really going to help you in life with everything you've just said. And this conversation's been incredible, and it's definitely
Absolutely, yeah.
opened,
That's the value of
yeah,
reflection.
hugely. It's this whole conversation has opened my eyes up, and it's kind of found this new sense of like, right, I need to go and now read and learn some more, and it's got me in it's got me in this like educational mode, and it's really really strange because I don't normally get that from a conversation, and I massively thank you for that. And I know just before kind of
And I'd really like to emphasize, like, these are largely not my ideas. These are ideas I've had. I'm very grateful that I've had the opportunity to learn and work in. And I just think of myself as I get to teach them, and communicate them. That's what I really love doing, and applying them, in my own life. So these are ideas that are really largely from psychology and self development. And it's really weird how I don't know if you guys encounter this, but I find a lot of people really shy away from self development, or they have a very cynical attitude towards it, or a cynical attitude towards motivation or ideas that could conceivably help you improve the quality of your life. We're very guarded against them. I don't know exactly why, but I think there's probably complicated, lots of different reasons. But it's something I'm really passionate about. I just think,
about to say it is the fear of change that most people won't accept a new idea if they've already doing if we're doing the same thing for 20 years, it's just natural for them to do it. And especially with the older generation as such, I think it's more when you come into the youngsters now, they're all up for the change, but it is that fear of the unknown, that fear of like, if I do that, what would it be? It's the same. I think of it the same way as as like trying to hold a spider, a spider. Those that have got fear of a spider, it's not the fear of holding it; it's the fear of what will happen when you hold it. So for me, the fear is of the fear itself, if that makes kind of sense. And it's something I've been toying with and playing around with in conversations with people to get their idea on it. Because again, it's that right there, what you said for me is that fear of the unknown of what's going to happen for them to positively accept that change.
I find it really interesting when people react to a person next to them changing, like their best friend changes or their partner changes, and often they have a negative reaction. And I think it's like you say, it's that fear of the unknown, but also, if my friend or my partner can improve their situation, what does that say about me? And they see it as like a force of judgment on them. If my best friend can lose weight, does that mean I should be losing weight? And I experienced this because I've had experiences taking breaks from alcohol, so I'll not drink for like not a huge amount of time, like 30 days or a couple of months. And people's reactions are so often very defensive, where you just mention it and you're not necessarily trying to make a big deal about it. You're in a social situation, you say, I'm actually not drinking, and that's all you say, and then their reaction can be very defensive, like, oh, I don't think I ever need to not drink. I think my relationship with alcohol is absolutely perfect. So it's so interesting to watch that, and you watch it again and again and again.
Do you know, this is getting me thinking about a lot of stuff and whatnot, but something that, I've taken away, and it is getting me thinking, and it is, I go into a lot of sort of mental health groups on, through Facebook and things like that, and we co look after now the Men's Collective. It's supported by us and a great charity called Bottled Up Blokes. And I'm not singling anybody out in any group whatsoever, but when you see things going into groups and whatnot, people want answers straight away, but they're not willing to go and explore why they want them answers. They're not willing to change the sort of the narrative to think, right, that I know that's the answer that I want, but I want it now. They don't want to go and do the groundwork. And I feel that's a lot with sort of mental health as well. And I've been there personally, where I've kind of woke up in the morning and thought, right, I know I need to do that. And why isn't it here now? but I don't want to go and do the homework to make me understand why I want to do that. I don't want to understand that process and that. And it's just everything that you're just saying just is just got my head spinning. I just think it's like, yeah. So there's not a question there. It's just something that's just going around in my head.
I love talking about this stuff. But tell me, like, what's your guys' experience of starting this podcast been, and what do you think have been like the biggest benefits for you? Because it's a difficult, like, I know it's a really difficult thing to have a podcast, to put out episodes all the time. How has it benefited you guys?
We've learned so much, though.
Um,
I mean,
yeah, we have, haven't we? It's been crazy.
yeah,
And I know we both see it as this is like a weekly counselling for myself and Ryan. I think we could both agree on that. That it is. It's a way for us to really like just have a normal conversation. Hence why having like yourself on, we don't pre-write any questions or any ideas. We just flow with the conversation, and I think that's what helps it so well. I think when we brought out our very own kind of stories, I think that's when one, it was a massive step for us both because there was a lot in there that we hadn't told family, friends, partners, anything like that. But at the same time, it showed everybody that we weren't doing this because we wanted to jump onto something that was fresh and we wanted to try and say, look at us, see what we're doing, how cool are we. It was literally like, listen, we know the shit times, we know when you're in the thick mud and the dark and in the fog and all these acronyms that you use, and we're just here to chat and to have a conversation. And for me personally, it's been a massive change. And even like my partner now, she knows like, right, Sunday night's a recording night, and she's very much like, right, you need to do this, you need to do that, because it has helped my mental health massively doing this. Um, but yeah, I think for Ryan, it's probably quite similar with probably a handful of more added to it.
yeah. So for me, I mean, one of the biggest things for this is right at the beginning. It's me and Jack knew each other, and we were friends. I won't say we were like really like close, but it's brought us massively. Sort of, I find it odd going a couple of days and not sort of like, oh, Jack's not messaging or something like that. I find that really peculiar now. But on the flip side to that, watching how Jack's developed in his own sort of personal development now has been an absolute sort of privilege. From when early days, it was that sort of, it's this, and this. But now it's like, do you know what? That's kind of changed my way of thinking. He was on about his own sort of battles with his what he thought was to be sort of autism and stuff, and I'm not going to get tested for it and things like that. But now he's like, do you know what? I'm going to consider getting tested, and he's putting things into place to get tested for that. So being able to watch that, it's been a growth in myself. So yeah, and for people to be asking us on our own podcast questions, that's
I
that's
went
that's a
therapist on you
first.
guys. I'm sorry.
That's a first. So no, it's massive.
How have you found it trying to obviously? So we obviously have to. I think like yourself. You know what I mean? We've got a day job, we've got family, we've got everything going on. It's absolutely crazy trying to keep up with like the shows and the editing and socials and everything. How have you found it with regards to your profession, and then going into as it kind of hindered your profession? As it gave you another sense of direction? Has it actually helped you? What's the process behind it?
I would say it's definitely been a lot of hard work, and mostly it's something you have to make time and you have to do it in your spare time, and it's been very challenging to fit it in logistically. But I would say it's been immensely helpful. And what's amazing about podcasting is, like, if you're gonna pick something to devote your time to, pick something that gives you a lot of return on your investment, where you learn like 10 things by doing one thing. And that's the amazing thing about podcasting, is to do a podcast, you have to learn how to network in order to get guests. You need to learn how to speak. You need to learn how to produce and edit audio and do the post production. You have to learn internet marketing. You have to learn all of these different skills, which most of which translates so seamlessly into whatever your job is. So knowing how to speak is probably the number one skill anyone can learn to better themselves at work. And obviously, because my podcast is about my job, then it's been very synergistic for me, because it also means I have an excuse to meet people who are at a high level in my field, and an excuse to talk to them for an hour, and that's been absolutely incredible. So I think a lot of hard work at the front end in particular, but very, very, very well worth it, as I'm sure you guys are also finding out for yourselves. I'm very, I don't know, you can, there's something about learning how to present your ideas to the world as well, and learning how to speak in a coherent way. That's, I don't know, there's nothing that can replace that for me, I think.
No, it's yeah, definitely agreement there. And I think one thing from me, obviously, we look at like the statistics and that kind of what our reach is, where we're getting to, because you always want to know if you're doing well or you want to change. But the one thing for me is sit there and thinking, right, you've got all these people listening. You just never know which one person is listening to one particular episode and that's just changed their mindset completely without you ever knowing. You just don't know what the power of the conversation you've just had has done on someone. So this episode right here will go out and you don't know the impact that's going to have. And it's kind of like it's so rewarding in that aspect without someone telling you thank you, well done. You don't need that. You don't need the thanks and everything behind it because you know it's got the potential to really show someone.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, in that aspect with Jack saying that we've been quite privileged with one of our sort of features that we do on our podcast, and it's called Have Your Say. This is where um, people write in, and we've had people from all over the globe, from the States, Australia, and you know, north and south of the UK, and it's been quite rewarding because they ask us sort of questions around their mental health and how we would look at it. And we always do say that we're not professionals, but this is kind of our take on it. And it's just what I would call, I won't say common sense, but it's what I would look at as in practical advice.
Mm.
And some of the responses that we get from it, saying, that's given me the ability to talk to my son, and then my son's turn around to say that saved his life.
Wow.
That for me, yeah, when you see that, it's been unreal. So before we do bring the show to a close, and I don't really want to bring it to a close because I think this has just been so enlightening. I would love to it won't be this year, but maybe next year coming back on
Absolutely.
for another spot. It'll be absolutely amazing to get you back on. But where can people find your sort of podcast? Where what's it called? Where can they find it? When's episodes released?
Yeah, so it's called the Thinking Mind podcast, and you can find it on Apple, Spotify, all the major podcast apps. We're on Twitter at Thinking Mind Pod, and we're on Instagram, Thinking Mind Podcast. So if you like the kind of stuff we've been talking about, you really find three kinds of episodes there: expert interviews, lived experience, and what I call audio essays, where one of us just kind of expands on a topic, like, for example, personality or conflict or things along those lines.
Absolutely, I think you've got gained yourself a new listener in me anyway. So I'll be joining that, and I'll be looking at the socials as well. So, Alex, I really really thank you for your time. It is really sort of enlightening and been empowering for myself. So thank you for that, Jack, mate. I'm stoked for this one. I'm excited for it. I don't want it to stop, but I think we need to, don't we?
No, it's no, I'm in the same mindset, and it is kind of, if we have to bring it to a close at some point, sadly, this is well, we want it to keep going. But again, Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak to us, to share your knowledge. And guys, make sure you go and have a listen. Check out the socials on both Let's Be Frank and over on the Thinking Mind podcast, and make sure you go and give them all a listen. And Ryan, I shall leave the close with you as always.
Alex, thank you so much. Jack, it's been a pleasure. But I'm going to end the show as I always end the show. Stand up, speak out, and remember, use your voice.